He walked in wearing dusty shoes, a faded hat, and carried nothing but an old sack over his shoulder. The moment he said, "I own this bank," laughter erupted across the lobby. Security moved to escort him out, customers whispered, and staff rolled their eyes. But when that old man opened his sack, the room went silent, and what happened next left everyone in shock. Before we dive into this powerful story about truth, pride, and justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share with someone who loves a good twist. Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. It was just another busy afternoon at Chase Bank, the lobby buzzing with business professionals, wealthy clients, and employees who prided themselves on efficiency and exclusivity. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and soft classical music played in the background, setting the tone of quiet sophistication. Jessica, a young bank teller, tapped her manicured nails on the counter while waiting for the next customer. She had worked at Chase for 3 years and had seen all kinds of people walk through its grand glass doors, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The doors swung open, and in walked an old black man, his clothes faded and wrinkled, his shoes scuffed from years of use. A worn-out sack hung over his shoulder, its edges frayed, as though it had traveled miles with him. The second he stepped inside, heads turned. The customers, dressed in fine suits and elegant dresses, wrinkled their noses. The security guard, a muscular man named Brad, narrowed his eyes. The bank staff exchanged amused glances, whispering among themselves. "Oh, looks like someone walked into the wrong place," one of the tellers murmured, barely containing her smirk. Brad, always eager to assert his authority, strode forward and blocked the old man's path. He folded his arms, towering over him with a smug expression. "Sir," Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I think you're lost. The community shelter is 2 blocks down." A chuckle rippled through the room. Some customers shook their heads, entertained by the interaction. But the old man didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his head, his tired yet piercing eyes locking onto Brad's. "I'm not lost," he said calmly. His voice was deep, steady. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Brad scoffed. "Oh, yeah? And what's your business here?" A slight smile played on the old man's lips. He adjusted his sack and took a step forward, unbothered by the stares around him. "I came," he said, "to check on my bank." For a second, there was silence. Then, laughter erupted from nearly everyone in the lobby. His bank? Even Jessica, who had initially been quiet, felt her lips twitch in amusement. Surely this was some kind of joke. Wait. A businessman in an expensive gray suit chuckled, nudging the person beside him. Did he just say his bank? Brad let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. "Sir, this is Chase Bank, not some backyard piggy bank." He shook his head, crossing his arms again. "Unless you've got millions stashed away in that sack, I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself any further." The old man remained unfazed. He shifted his sack slightly, as if adjusting its weight, then locked eyes with Brad. "I own this bank," he repeated, his voice firm. The laughter grew louder. "Yeah, and I own the White House," someone shouted from the back. A woman in a silk blouse chuckled, shaking her head. "Where do these people come from?" Brad smirked. "All right, sir, you've had your fun. Now, let's go." He reached out to grab the old man's arm. That's when the old man opened his sack. The moment his hand disappeared into the sack, the laughter stopped. The air grew tense. Some people took a step back, watching cautiously. Brad's fingers twitched toward his holster, preparing for the worst. The old man slowly pulled out a thick, neatly folded document, sealed with an official Chase Bank insignia. He held it up, letting the light catch the embossed seal. "If you don't believe me," he said, "read this." Brad hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he took the document. He unfolded it and began to read. His smirk vanished. His expression, once full of arrogance, twisted into one of disbelief. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the words again, as if his eyes had played a trick on him the first time. Jessica noticed the way his breathing changed, the way his fingers tightened around the paper. "What's wrong?" one of the tellers asked, now more curious and amused. Brad swallowed hard. This says that he licked his lips, suddenly unsure of his words. This says that Mr. Langston is the majority shareholder of Chase Bank. Gasps rippled through the room. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. What? The businessman in the gray suit blurted out. That can't be right. Brad turned to the bank manager's office. His confidence was gone. Mr. Henderson? You might want to come out here. Within seconds, the office door swung open and Richard Henderson, the senior bank manager, strode out. He was a man in his mid-50s, dressed in an immaculate navy suit, his silver tie perfectly knotted. He exuded authority and power, until he locked eyes with Walter Langston. Henderson froze. Jessica watched his face drain of color. His eyes flickered to the document in Brad's hands, then back to the old man. No, that's not possible, Henderson stammered, stepping forward. He snatched the document from Brad and scanned it frantically. His breathing became shallow. His fingers trembled. And then, in a moment that changed everything, Henderson looked up at Walter Langston and muttered the words no one expected to hear. This document is legitimate. A shocked hush fell over the bank. The businessman staggered back. Customers exchanged nervous glances. The tellers, once amused, were now dead silent. Walter Langston adjusted the strap of his sack, his eyes sweeping over the faces that had mocked him moments ago. Jessica's chest tightened. This was real. Walter took a deep breath, then spoke in a calm, controlled voice. I believe, he said, we need to have a serious conversation about how this bank is run. The air inside Chase Bank felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. No one moved. No one spoke. The customers who had mocked the old man minutes ago were now frozen in place, their amusement replaced with stunned disbelief. Jessica, still behind her teller counter, couldn't take her eyes off him. This man, this mystery man, had walked like a forgotten relic of the past, a sack over his shoulder, dressed like someone who had no business stepping foot into such an elite establishment. And yet, with just a few words in a single document, he had sent shockwaves through the entire bank. Walter Langston, the majority shareholder of Chase Bank. Richard Henderson, the senior bank manager, stood clutching the document in his trembling hands. His mouth open and closed as though he wanted to deny what was right in front of him. But the truth was undeniable. Mr. Langston, Henderson finally managed to say, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Walter chuckled, not out of amusement, but out of disappointment. A misunderstanding, he echoed. He took a slow step forward, each footstep echoing across the polished marble floor. Tell me, Mr. Henderson, what exactly is unclear about this document? Henderson cleared his throat, his usual confidence faltering. Well, you see, he hesitated, his mind scrambling for a way out. He turned to Brad, the security guard, who looked just as lost. This document may say that you're a majority shareholder, but that doesn't mean you can just walk in here and... Walter raised a hand, silencing him. Tell me something, Mr. Henderson, Walter said, his voice calm, yet commanding. How long have you worked at Chase Bank? Henderson hesitated. 15 years. Walter nodded. 15 years. And in all that time, did it ever occur to you to look into who actually owns the bank you manage? Henderson swallowed hard. He had no answer. The silence was deafening. Walter shifted the weight of his sack, his fingers tightening around the worn-out fabric. Then he turned his gaze to Brad, the security guard who had tried to throw him out. And you? Walter continued, his eyes locked onto Brad like a predator watching prey. What did you say to me when I walked in? Brad's throat bobbed as he swallowed nervously. He glanced at the onlookers, the same ones who had laughed alongside him just moments ago, but they were no longer backing him up. I was just following protocol, Brad stammered. Walter raised an eyebrow. Protocol? Brad nodded quickly, grasping at anything to justify his actions. Yes, sir. We have strict policies to ensure the safety and exclusivity of our clients. I didn't recognize you, and... Walter chuckled again, but this time it was sharp, edged with something cold. "You didn't recognize me." Walter shook his head. "You assumed that because I didn't walk in here wearing an expensive suit, because I wasn't escorted by a financial advisor, because I carried this old sack instead of a briefcase full of stock reports, that I didn't belong here." Brad said nothing. Walter turned, sweeping his gaze across the lobby, his eyes lingering on each and every person who had laughed at him. "And you all thought the same thing," he continued, his voice carrying across the room. "Didn't you?" No one answered. The businessman in the gray suit, the woman in the silk blouse, the wealthy clients who had whispered and mocked him, they all avoided his gaze. Walter exhaled slowly, then reached back into his sack. The tension spiked. Jessica noticed how a few customers subtly stepped back, as if expecting something dramatic to happen. Even Brad tensed up, his fingers twitching by his side. But Walter wasn't reaching for anything dangerous. When his hand emerged, it held something small, something simple, a set of keys. He let them dangle between his fingers for a moment, the metal catching the bright overhead lights. Then, in the most unexpected twist of events, Walter tossed them toward Henderson. The senior bank manager barely had time to react. He fumbled, nearly dropping them before catching them awkwardly in both hands. Confused, Henderson stared at Walter. What is this?" Walter smiled. "The keys," he said, "to my office." A collective gasp swept through the room. Jessica felt her breath hitch. His office? Henderson's hands shook as he looked at the keys. They were the exact same set of master keys used for the executive offices on the top floor. But how? Henderson looked panicked now. This must be a mistake. Walter stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His voice was softer now, but it carried a weight no one could ignore. "Mistakes were made today, Mr. Henderson," Walter said, "but not by me." The room was deathly silent. Walter turned back to the customers. "For years," he said, addressing everyone now, "this bank has catered to the wealthy, the powerful, and the privileged. And yet when an old man walks in with nothing but a sack, you all assume he is beneath you." Jessica's throat felt tight. Walter gestured toward his sack. "Do you know what's inside this?" he asked, his voice steady. No one answered. Walter took a deep breath. Then, with careful precision, he reached into the sack one last time. And this time, what he pulled out changed everything. A thick folder, bound in leather, with gold embossed letters that read, "Walter Langston, Founder's Agreement." Henderson's face went pale. Brad's jaw nearly hit the floor. Jessica felt her heart pound in her chest. Walter Langston wasn't just a shareholder. He was the original founder of Chase Bank. And everyone in that room had just mocked the man who built it. A suffocating silence settled over the bank's lavish interior. The laughter, the mockery, the arrogance, all of it had evaporated in an instant. Every eye in the room was glued to the thick leather-bound folder in Walter Langston's hands. Jessica felt her knees go weak behind the counter. Founder's Agreement? She didn't know much about high-level business deals, but she knew enough to understand what this meant. Walter Langston wasn't just a shareholder. He was the architect of it all. The man who had just been laughed at and nearly thrown out was the very reason Chase Bank existed. Henderson, still clutching the set of keys Walter had tossed him, staggered backward like a man who had just been told the world was ending. His face had turned a ghastly shade of white. This can't be real," he stammered. "This has to be some sort of—" He flipped through the pages of the Founder's Agreement, searching for a loophole, anything to prove that what he was looking at wasn't real. But the deeper he read, the more his hands began to shake. The bank's history was laid out in black and white, clear, undeniable, and stamped with the official seals of long-forgotten agreements. Walter Langston had built this bank, and for decades they had erased him from its history. Brad, the security guard, let out a low, whispered curse under his breath. Just minutes ago, he had been threatening to throw Walter out onto the street. Now he was standing in front of the man who owned everything in the building, including his job. A single bead of sweat rolled down Brad's temple as he took a nervous step back, desperately avoiding Walter's gaze. Meanwhile, the wealthy customers, The ones who had openly ridiculed Walter just moments ago were now pretending to be invisible. Jessica watched as one man, the businessman in the expensive gray suit, casually tried to slip his sunglasses on, as if hoping Walter wouldn't recognize him. Too late. Walter's sharp eyes locked onto him. "You," Walter said, his voice smooth but cutting. The businessman froze, the sunglasses halfway up his nose. He quickly lowered them, forcing a strained smile. Yes." Walter gave him a slow, pointed look. "Didn't you call me a confused old man when I walked in?" The businessman choked on air. "Oh, that was just a misunderstanding." He let out an awkward chuckle, adjusting his tie nervously. Walter didn't blink. "A misunderstanding," he echoed. The businessman nodded quickly, as if desperate to agree with anything Walter said. "Yes, sir. I wasn't aware of who you were, otherwise I would have." Walter held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it," he said, his tone icy. The businessman clamped his mouth shut. Walter slowly turned to Henderson. The senior bank manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I believe you were about to tell me how this was a mistake," Walter said, watching as Henderson's forehead glistened with sweat. I, Henderson swallowed hard. His lips trembled as he struggled to form words, but his mind was spinning too fast to process what was happening. Jessica, still at the teller counter, couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction watching Henderson squirm. The man had built a career off treating people like they were beneath him. Now, he was standing before a man who had built the very foundation he claimed to manage. A new kind of tension filled the air. Jessica wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but she could feel something shifting, something big. Walter Langston took a step forward, and with that simple movement, the power dynamic in the room shifted entirely. He was no longer the old man with the sack. He was the owner of Chase Bank, and everyone in that room now knew it. But the real reckoning hadn't even begun yet. The air inside Chase Bank felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of Walter Langston's revelation had turned the once lively atmosphere into a suffocating silence. Jessica, from behind her teller counter, could feel the tension thickening, pressing down on every soul in the building. Henderson, the senior bank manager, stood frozen, his grip on the founder's agreement shaking like a leaf in the wind. Walter Langston, the old man they had mocked, was now the most powerful person in the room, and no one knew what he was going to do next. Walter's sharp, knowing eyes swept over the crowd once more, taking in every uncomfortable expression, every nervous shift of weight. They had underestimated him, and now they were realizing just how costly that mistake was. Brad, the security guard, suddenly cleared his throat, breaking the silence. He was sweating profusely, his previous bravado completely gone. Mr. Langston," he said, forcing a smile that dripped with desperation. "If I had known who you were, I never would have—" Walter raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "No excuses," Walter said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable finality. "I don't need apologies that only come after the truth is revealed." Brad clamped his mouth shut, his eyes darting to the exit as though debating whether to make a run for it. Jessica watched with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had seen men like Brad all her life. Men who wore their authority like armor, but crumbled the moment real power entered the room. And Henderson? Jessica had never seen the senior bank manager look so utterly lost. His usually confident posture was gone, replaced by the stance of a man whose entire world was crumbling beneath his feet. Walter took a step closer to him, his presence commanding. "Mr. Henderson," Walter said, tilting his head slightly. "You've worked at this bank for, what, 15 years?" Henderson nodded stiffly, his throat bobbing as he swallowed nervously. "Why, yes, sir." Walter's lips curled into something almost amused, but not quite. 15 years, he repeated. "And yet, in all that time, you never once asked who the real owner was?" Henderson's face turned a deeper shade of red. I assume the board." "Yes, the board," Walter said, his voice smooth but carrying an underlying sharpness. The same board that conveniently erased my name from every public record. The same board that decided I was too old to be relevant. The silence was deafening. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Walter let out a slow, measured sigh before looking Henderson directly in the eye. "Tell me," Walter continued, "when I walked into this bank, what did you see?" Henderson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Walter waited. "Well," Walter pressed. "Go on. Say it." Henderson swallowed hard. "A homeless man," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Walter gave a slow, knowing nod. "That's what I thought," he said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one dared to meet Walter's eyes. Jessica felt a sudden rush of emotion, not just anger, but something deeper. This wasn't just about one old man walking into a bank and being mistreated. This was about a society that judged people by their appearances, their clothing, their status. And Walter Langston was about to teach them all a lesson they wouldn't forget. With a slow, deliberate movement, Walter reached into his sack one last time. Henderson flinched. Brad held his breath. Walter pulled out a small, black notebook. Jessica leaned forward slightly. Her curiosity piqued. Walter flipped it open and ran a finger down the page before stopping at a specific line. "Mr. Henderson," Walter said, his voice even, "your salary is $350,000 per year, correct?" Henderson blinked, completely caught off guard. "Why, yes, sir." Walter nodded. "Brad," Walter said, turning his gaze to the security guard, "your yearly salary is $65,000, correct?" Brad hesitated, then nodded slowly. Walter tapped a finger against a notebook, his expression unreadable. "Fascinating," he mused. "Both of you make a comfortable living working at this bank." Neither man spoke. Walter let out a slow breath. "And yet," he continued, "when you saw me walk through those doors, neither of you thought I was worthy of being in this building." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Then, without warning, Walter snapped the notebook shut. Henderson jumped. Brad's breath hitched. Jessica's heart raced. Walter Langston took a single step forward and said 6 words that sent chills down everyone's spine. "You two no longer work here." A collective gasp swept through the bank. Henderson staggered backward. "W what?" "No, you can't." Walter raised an eyebrow. "I own this bank," Walter said, his voice calm, yet unshakable. "And I do not employ people who cannot treat others with basic human decency." Brad's knees nearly gave out. "Please, Mr. Langston, I didn't mean to." Walter held up a hand. "I am not interested in excuses." His voice was final, absolute. Jessica had never seen anything like it before. The power, the justice, the reckoning. It was a moment she knew she would never forget. And neither would anyone else in that room, because Walter Langston had just done what so many dream of doing. He had put power back in its rightful place. And this was only the beginning. A stunned silence filled the bank. The weight of Walter Langston's words hung in the air like a thick fog, unshakable, undeniable. Henderson looked like a man on the verge of a heart attack, his mouth open and closed, his lips trembling as if his brain was trying to catch up with reality. "F fired," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be serious." "Mr. Langston, please. I've worked here for 15 years. Walter folded his arms across his chest, his expression unmoved. "And in those 15 years," he said, "how many people have you treated the way you treated me today?" Henderson's face paled. Brad, the security guard, took a shaky step forward. His hands were clasped together. His once threatening posture now reduced to pure desperation. "Mr. Langston," he said, voice thick with panic, I was just doing my job. I thought you were a trespasser. If I had known." Walter raised a single hand. "You saw an elderly black man with a sack," he said, his voice steady, "and you immediately assumed I was a problem." Brad's breath caught in his throat. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't check your facts. You judged me solely on my appearance." Walter took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Brad's. "And how many others have you done that to?" Brad swallowed hard. He had no answer. because they both knew the truth. Jessica, standing behind the teller counter, watched in awe. She had worked here for years, watching as Henderson and Brad belittled customers, humiliated those who didn't look wealthy enough, and walked around like they owned the place. And now, they were the ones begging for mercy. A twisted sense of justice bloomed in her chest. Walter exhaled sharply before turning to the entire room. His gaze swept over the customers, the staff, every single soul who had watched and done nothing. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "You all laughed at me," Walter said, his voice filled with quiet authority. "You assumed I was nothing because I didn't fit your idea of success." No one said a word. Walter took another step forward. Placing his worn sack on the teller counter, he patted it once, as if reminding them that everything they had once ridiculed was now the very thing undoing them. "Let this be a lesson," he continued. "Never judge a person by their appearance, because today you mocked the owner of this bank." A shiver ran through the room. One of the customers, an older man in a navy blue suit, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Langston," he said cautiously, "perhaps we all overreacted." Walter's sharp gaze flickered to him. "Overreacted?" Walter echoed. His voice was calm, but the room still flinched. The businessman chuckled nervously. "Yes. I mean, surely we can all just move forward, right?" He forced a weak smile. "We all make mistakes." Walter studied him for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "You're absolutely right," Walter said smoothly. "We all make mistakes." The businessman visibly relaxed. Then Walter's smile disappeared. "But some mistakes," he added, "have consequences." The businessman's relief shattered instantly. Walter reached into his sack one more time. The crowd held their breath. This time, he pulled out a second document. Jessica leaned forward. It wasn't just any document. It was a list of terminations. And from the way Walter tapped his fingers against it, it was freshly updated. He turned to Henderson and Brad one final time. "Security will escort you both out," Walter said simply. Brad let out a strangled gasp. Henderson took a wobbly step backward, his entire body trembling. "And no," Henderson croaked. "This isn't fair. You can't do this." Walter tilted his head. "Can't I?" he asked. "Because last time I checked." He lifted the founder's agreement, letting the golden seal glisten under the fluorescent lights. "This bank belongs to me." Brad's legs gave out. Henderson covered his face with shaking hands. Jessica watched as two uniformed security guards, ones who actually worked for the building, not Brad, stepped forward. "Gentlemen," one of them said flatly, "let's go." Brad let out a low whimper. Henderson opened his mouth as if to protest, but nothing came out. And then, just like that, they were escorted out. The door shut behind them. Silence. A new kind of energy swept through the room. The balance of power had completely shifted. Walter Langston was in charge now. Jessica could feel the change. The air felt lighter. The staff, those who had once feared Henderson, exchanged uneasy glances. Walter set the documents down and turned to the employees. "As for the rest of you," he said, his tone measured but firm, "there will be some restructuring." The employees stiffened. Jessica's heart pounded. Walter met her gaze. And then, to her surprise, he smiled. "Starting with promotions for those who actually treat customers with respect," he added. A wave of relief and excitement washed over Jessica. For years, she had worked under Henderson's cruelty, Brad's intimidation, and the toxic culture they had created. But now, things were about to change. Walter took a deep breath. Glancing around the bank that he had built from nothing, he had taken back what was rightfully his. But he wasn't done yet. No, the real reckoning was just beginning. The tension inside the bank had shifted from shock to uncertainty. Employees, once ruled by Henderson and Brad's iron grip, now stood uneasy yet hopeful under the command of Walter Langston. Jessica still couldn't believe what had just happened. Moments ago, Walter had been mocked, humiliated, and almost thrown out. Now, he was standing tall, the rightful owner of the bank, wielding his power with calm precision. Henderson and Brad were gone, but their removal was only the beginning. Walter scanned the room, his sharp gaze falling on each employee one by one. "Now that we've taken care of the first issue," he said, his voice clear and commanding, "let's talk about the rest." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Nobody knew what to expect. Was he going to fire more people? Was he about to shut the bank down? Jessica could hear some of the tellers whispering behind her. Anxious, worried, Walter tapped his fingers on the counter. Once, twice. Then, in a calm yet firm tone, he said, "This bank will not operate the way it is under Henderson's rule. That ends today." The whisper stopped immediately. Walter continued, "I built this bank with the intention of serving the community, of giving people an opportunity to grow their wealth and secure their future. But what I've seen today, corruption, disrespect, a total disregard for human decency." He let those words sink in. "I will not allow that to continue," he added. The room remained silent. Then Walter did something unexpected. He turned to Jessica. "You," he said, nodding in her direction. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "And me?" she stammered. Walter nodded. His expression was unreadable. "You were the only employee here who showed me even a shred of decency," Walter said. "You didn't jump to conclusions. You didn't mock me. And when you saw how I was being treated, you looked uncomfortable. That tells me something about your character." Jessica felt her heart race. She didn't know what to say. Walter continued, "How long have you been working here?" Jessica swallowed. 3 years. Walter hummed. "And in those 3 years, how many times have you seen customers treated unfairly?" Jessica hesitated, but then she answered, "Too many to count." Walter's jaw tightened. "I thought so," he muttered. Then, to everyone's surprise, Walter turned to a crowd of employees and said, "As of now, Jessica is being promoted to branch manager." The bank erupted in shock. Jessica's mouth fell open. "Sir, she began, but Walter held up a hand. "I need someone I can trust to run this branch properly," he said. "And that's you." The weight of his words settled into her chest. Jessica had been overlooked for promotions countless times. Henderson had always favored his friends, the ones who acted just like him. He had told Jessica, on more than one occasion, that she was too soft, too kind, too unwilling to be ruthless. And now, she had been given a promotion by the owner himself. Jessica's fingers trembled slightly as she tried to process what was happening. I don't know what to say," she admitted. Walter's lips curled into a small smile. "Say yes," he said simply. Jessica swallowed hard. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice growing steadier. "Yes, I'll do it." Walter nodded in approval. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to the rest of the staff. "Now, let's talk about the rest of you." The remaining employees stiffened. Walter reached into his sack again, pulling out a list. Jessica recognized the names. It was a record of complaints, reports from customers who had been mistreated, and internal misconduct reports. Walter ran his finger down the list. "There are people in this bank who think their titles protect them," he said, "who think their behavior won't catch up with them." The tension in the air was thick. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Walter tapped a name. Linda Collins. A woman, tall, blonde, and dressed in an expensive gray suit, stiffened. "You've had multiple complaints about racial discrimination," Walter said. "Turning down loan applications without even checking full documentation. Prioritizing wealthy clients while ignoring lower-income ones." Linda's face flushed red. I was just following policy," she argued. Walter raised an eyebrow. "Policy?" He held up a folder. "Because I have documents that say otherwise." Linda went silent. Walter moved on to the next name. Richard Holmes. A short, balding man visibly paled. Walter continued. "Harassing female employees. Intimidating junior staff. Making inappropriate comments about customers." Richard gulped. Walter's tone was unrelenting. "I've spoken to my legal team. We're moving forward with immediate dismissal for those who have violated ethical guidelines." A ripple of shock moved through the staff. Walter set the folder down. Then he looked over the remaining employees, the ones who weren't on the list. The ones who had kept their heads down, afraid to speak up. He sighed. I know some of you stayed silent because you felt you had no choice, Walter said. I understand that fear, but that era is over. He turned to Jessica. As branch manager, I expect fairness, respect, and professionalism from everyone under your leadership, Walter said. Jessica nodded, a new fire burning in her chest. Walter stepped back, glancing around the bank he had built, the bank that had fallen into the wrong hands. But now he was taking it back. And the next step, well, that was going to be even bigger. The air inside the bank was thick with anticipation. Walter had taken back what was rightfully his, but he wasn't finished. There was one final step to ensure that this bank, and everyone inside it, would never forget this day. Jessica stood beside him, her posture now more confident. She had gone from being an overlooked employee to branch manager in a matter of hours. And now, she was witnessing history unfold. The staff who had been corrupt, prejudiced, and outright cruel were either gone or standing on their last warning. The few remaining employees, those who had either been afraid to speak up or genuinely wanted to do good, watched with cautious optimism. And the customers? They had gone from spectators to witnesses. The elderly couple Walter had spoken earlier stood near the exit, whispering to one another. The young black woman, who had nearly been turned away for a loan application, had her phone recording everything. And then there was a security guard. He was still standing by the entrance, looking down at the floor. Walter turned his gaze toward him. You. The guard stiffened. He had been one of the first people to try and throw Walter out. Not because he wanted to, but because he thought it was his job. You treated me like I was nothing, Walter said. You didn't even ask questions. You just followed orders. The guard swallowed hard. Walter raised a hand. Tell me something. The guard nodded quickly. Walter's next words were sharp. Would you have done the same thing if I were a white man in a suit? Silence. The guard's jaw clenched. Jessica watched as his entire body tensed. He wanted to deny it, but he knew the truth. Everyone did. Finally, after a long moment, the guard's shoulders slumped. No, he admitted. Walter exhaled slowly. He didn't have to say anything else. The lesson had been learned. Then Walter turned his attention to the customers. This bank was built to serve you, he announced, his voice carrying authority and warmth. But instead, it became a place where people were judged based on how they looked, how much money they had, and who they knew. He shook his head. That is no longer the case. Murmurs spread through the room. Walter continued. From this moment forward, this bank will return to what it was meant to be, a place where everyone, regardless of race, status, or background, can walk with dignity and be treated with respect. Applause erupted from the customers. Jessica felt a wave of pride swell in her chest. Walter looked at her. You have a big job ahead of you, he said. But I trust you. Jessica straightened her shoulders. I won't let you down. Walter nodded, then turned to the remaining staff. This is a new era, he said. If you're willing to be part of it, you're welcome to stay. But if you can't uphold these values, you're free to leave. The weight of his words settled over everyone. One by one, the employees nodded, some hesitantly, others with conviction. Walter took a deep breath. His journey to reclaiming what was his had been long and painful. But now he had done it. The mockery, the humiliation, the laughter, none of it mattered anymore. Because, in the end, they had laughed. But now, they regretted it.
I hope you enjoyed this story. If you haven't subscribed till now, please do. Click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share to friends for more.